Hi guys, it's Luke here. Welcome to the first ever video on this channel. Of course, I'm going to warn you now, this is going to be far from perfect. I hope that I can improve over time, but yeah, I wanted to make it a New Year's resolution that I needed to talk more about boxing. So yeah, here we are. Now, I want to talk about the fight that's coming up this weekend between Artur Beterbiev and Callum Smith. So, I'm seeing a lot of actually surprisingly quite divisive, it seems, in terms of the predictions that I'm seeing. You'd think on paper, like, one of the most dominant champions in the sport across the last sort of 5 or 6 years or so, against someone that's pretty new to the weight, doesn't have a belt, you know, hasn't really beaten anyone beyond British level, really. You'd think to me that it's a no-brainer that, we'd be seeing, basically everyone saying Beterbiev's going to wipe the floor with him, but it hasn't been going that way. And, I can see the arguments, but yeah, I wanted to just address a few things about the fight. So, the biggest point that I've seen people making is that Smith's a completely different fighter at 175 to what we saw at 168. And I mean, again, I can see the logic behind it. Okay, he probably was a bit weight drained at 168. He's moving up now, but at the end of the day, like, this is a guy that I'd say was a weight bully at 168. I think you can't ignore the fact that he had that advantage that he's actually still kind of probably got to some extent at 175, but obviously has lost that advantage to some level. And also, the biggest thing for me is that this isn't speculation that, like, oh, he's a different fighter at 175. Like, people are basing this as, like, he's proven he's a different fighter at 175 because of his fights against Castillo and Bodalik. And I think that's just extremely generous, to be honest. I mean, before Beterbiev fought Yard, the biggest thing that you saw people say about Yard was, okay, he fought Kovalev, but aside from that, he hasn't beaten anyone that's really anything to write home about, which is, I'd say, a fair comment. I think his career's been managed in a weird kind of way where there's no middle ground of his opposition. But, at the end of the day, he'd at least beaten Lyndon Arthur or something. But Lyndon Arthur, to me, is clearly on a more proven sort of fighter than Bodalik. Bodalik is, a European level fighter that has been knocked out at European level before, albeit once, but still, we're not talking about a world level type of fighter here by any stretch of the imagination. So, yeah, I think it's very, very generous the way people are talking about Callum Smith being a different fighter at this weight. And the other thing that people seem to be forgetting is that, okay, you can make the case Smith gets stronger as he goes up in weight, but at the same time, so do his opponents. We've seen him. The two fights that I'd really want to sort of mention for him are the ones against John Ryder and Canelo Alvarez. And yeah, okay, two world level guys, one of which, the best fighter of this generation, another of which, robbed of many decisions, including against Smith. And, for me, genuine world level type of fighter. But at the end of the day, like, it's more about his approach to each fight was, you know, people talk about Canelo's fight against Charlo and how cowardly Charlo's approach was. For me, honestly, Callum Smith was far worse, really, when you add some context to it. That, Charlo, at least, you can make the case, yeah, he did approach the fight too cowardly. You're never going to win the fight like that. That's the reality. Like, it's fair enough, like, you're going to get hurt, but at the end of the day, like, there's no point taking the fight if you're going to approach it like that. You've got no chance of winning the fight. And the thing is with Charlo, he's at least got the sort of caveat to it all that he came up in weight by two weight divisions. And, we've seen it before what happens with guys like Mikey Garcia against Spence and, Kell Brook against Golovkin, where at the end of the day, when you take a loss in boxing, it's not like, you take a loss in a football match, for example, and, okay, you've always got next week, you can sort of turn it around. Or tennis, same thing. You get knocked out of Wimbledon, you've got the US Open coming up. Like, it's not the end of the world. But, the difference obviously in boxing is if you take a bad enough beating, you could be done for your career. Like, that's the reality. Like, it does actually, beyond, okay, you get a psychological effect in every sport, but boxing is an actual physical effect. You can potentially be a different fighter after taking a bad loss. So there is at least that argument for Charlo. And we've seen it happen with guys coming up in weight before. Callum Smith's, like I say, he's at 168 a weight bully. There's no argument about it. And, at the end of the day, if you can't engage with a guy like Canelo, who's I think 8 inches shorter than Callum Smith, about 8 inch reach disadvantage, you know, if you can't engage with a guy like that, if that's too much for you, then like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, you know, that's at the end of the day, you're never, and it's a known thing. Like, you know, you're not going to win a decision against Canelo, barring like, you know, an absolute masterclass, which he wasn't going to do. So at the end of the day, like, you know, that's the reality. Like, you can't win a fight like that. So yeah, I think if he goes about this fight the same way against Beterbiev, it's going to be either at the best case scenario, the same story where he just loses a wide decision. That's the best case scenario if he approaches the fight like that. Worst case scenario is that, you know, as hard as Canelo hits, he doesn't hit like Beterbiev. So the chances are it is just going to be too much for him, and he's going to cause a stoppage. The other fight that I'd mention is John Ryder. Now the thing is, it's one thing with Canelo where Canelo plants his feet, hits hard himself. John Ryder, as much as I like him as a fighter, I think he's incredibly underrated. He doesn't hit like Canelo. That's the reality of it. Like, you know, he's not a big hitter even for that weight, really. I'd say, like, you know, there's a reason why. Again, as much as his resume should be a lot better than it is, there's a reason why they keep going the distance. You know, like, you know, he's had a couple of stoppage wins, but against the actual top guys, it hasn't happened like that. And you don't need to, but, you know, that's the reality of who he is as a fighter. Now, if you look at Callum Smith at the end of that fight with Ryder, he looked like he'd gone to hell and back. If you looked at his face by the end of that fight, and okay, there is the one difference that Ryder's a southpaw. I think he's actually more slippery than Beterbiev, harder to hit as a whole. But at the end of the day, like, you know, he was getting through at will, and we're talking about a guy that's got short arms, you know, also small fighter, similar frame. It's like, you know, physique wise similar to Canelo, both of which smaller than Beterbiev even. So yeah, this whole argument of the size advantage, again, I don't really see that, to be honest, myself. I think that Callum Smith isn't someone that actually knows how to use his size to his advantage. I think his biggest problem is how slow his feet are. So it's one thing having a jab, that's not going to keep smaller fighters away from you. Like, you know, you need to be able to move your feet, get away from them as they come in, and he isn't able to do that because he's, you know, incredibly slow. I think, you know, yeah, I just don't see how he's going to keep Beterbiev away from him. And Beterbiev himself is a guy that, you know, even at his age, actually does move around quite well, has very, very good feet himself. He's not Dmitry Bivol, but, you know, he is able to, you know, no matter who he's fought. We've seen Beterbiev against very slick boxers, much slicker boxers, much harder to hit than Callum Smith, like, you know, Marcus Brown and Gvozdyk. He will find a way to get in and, you know, make himself known. Like, you know, I don't see how, you know, okay, I'll put it this way. Gvozdyk had the size advantages, not quite as much as Smith, but, you know, he had the size advantage. Much harder to hit, much more technical, much quicker feet. Beterbiev still found a way to hit him, and, you know, we all saw how that fight ended, and it ended with, like, you know, him leaving the sport for about 5 years. So yeah, I just don't see the arguments that people are making for Smith. I just don't think that they're going to play out like that. I think, you know, all of the arguments that you could make for Smith winning are really actually more centered around Beterbiev. I think there is going to come a time when the age just does catch up with him. I don't think it's going to happen that quickly, because I don't think that his strengths are really that linked to his age. Like, you know, he's not really based on speed or anything like that. But I think actually the one thing that hasn't really been mentioned as much as it should be is the reason why this fight's happening now and not last year, which was because of the surgery that Beterbiev had, and the fact that he specifically had a bone infection in his jaw. Now that, you know, it's a thing that has given Beterbiev a lot of his success, is how durable he is, and that could potentially play a factor. I mean, Smith does hit hard, there's no denying that, but, you know, my feeling really is that what we're going to see is Smith have a couple of rounds of relative success at the start of the fight where, you know, Beterbiev's still just finding his range, because, you know, he is, for a guy that's a knockout artist, he's really incredibly calculated. He doesn't just charge in and go for a knockout. So yeah, first couple of rounds, I think Smith's going to keep him off, maybe win the rounds on the scorecards, but then Beterbiev's eventually going to, you know, make his presence known, and Smith's going to shell up like he always does, and Beterbiev's going to work the body, and yeah, I think we're going to actually see a corner stoppage from Callum Smith's corner. I don't see any way really actually that Smith wins the fight, barring a huge drop off from Beterbiev physically. So yeah, let me know what you guys think, and I'll try and keep this channel going regularly now. Thanks, bye.